What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we have got a brand new 2021 NFL mock draft for you with a bunch of new changes, with a bunch of new trades, so make sure to tune in. And if you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, let us hear it in the comments section. Did you agree, disagree with these picks? Would love to hear your opinions. And lastly, make sure to check us out on Twitter at AllDayPigskin. Give us a follow there to continue interacting with us as we get closer to the NFL draft. But with that being said, let's get right into this thing. With the first overall pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars select quarterback Trevor Lawrence. And this is the worst kept secret in the NFL. At this point in time, the Jaguars should just sign Trevor Lawrence. Should tell him that he's being drafted number one like we've seen with other players in the past. Go ahead and pre-order your Trevor Lawrence jerseys. That's what we are trying to say, Jacksonville Jaguars fans. Moving on to pick number 2, nothing else needs to be said about the Jaguars. We have got the New York Jets, and in similar fashion, this is another slam dunk pick at the quarterback position. This will be quarterback Zach Wilson to the Jets. This became a 1,000% lock after the trade of Sam Darnold, even though that's the way it was trending prior to that to begin with. So the first two picks, very much chalk. Getting to pick number 3, though, the San Francisco 49ers, this is where it gets a little bit tougher, even though we know it'll be a quarterback. Again, the only question is which quarterback, because it seems like one day it's Mac Jones, then it's Trey Lance, then it's Justin Fields. And I'm sure that every analyst has a different take on it. Us specifically, we like the upside of Trey Lance, but it seems like as of late, Justin Fields has been the guy that has been trending upwards and been linked to the 49ers the most so. And that could be a lot of times smoke, or it could be a very real thing. And we're going to go with the latter. It seems like that's what the consensus is right now. Fields is the betting favorite as things stand right now to go to the 49ers. And yes, things could change, but that's why, we're going to be doing other future mocks before the actual NFL mock draft at the end of April to see how things change. But as things stand right now, Justin Fields to the 49ers at pick number 3. Then getting to pick number 4, the Atlanta Falcons. This is truly where the 2021 NFL draft begins, because the Falcons have a boatload of options. They could trade back, and they're going to get a lot of calls for this pick. They could stay put and take a quarterback themselves. They could take a wide receiver, take an offensive lineman, take a tight end. All those options are on the table. Right now, we actually have the Falcons staying put here at pick number 4, and because they restructured Matt Ryan's contract, well, we think that they will pass on a quarterback and instead go with a guy that they have also been linked to a bunch, and that is Kyle Pitts, tight end from Florida, because Kyle Pitts is a guy that seems to be a generational talent at the tight end position. And you pair him up with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and Matt Ryan, that is a scary good offense. Arguably the best offense in the entire NFL. Just have to then work on consistency and limiting turnovers, and then the defense being consistent as well. But those are issues that can be addressed in later rounds. Right now, though, Kyle Pitts to the Atlanta Falcons. Moving on to pick number 5. This is a selection where the Bengals could go a number of different ways. They could go Jamar Chase, who's been linked to Joe Burrow and his desire to be reunited with him. But look, we have paired the Bengals with an offensive lineman since day one. Because if they want Joe Burrow to actually be relevant, who, by the way, is coming off a major injury because the offensive line was garbage last season, they need to upgrade that unit. That's exactly what they're going to do here. And right now, we have got them taking tackle Penei Sewell, who, again, it's either him or Rashawn Slater, depending maybe on personal preference, who you think will be the top tackle in this draft class. But the consensus, again, pointing to Sewell for the Cincinnati Bengals. Moving on to pick number 6, we've got the Miami Dolphins, who obviously after, trading back with the 49ers, then trading up with the Philadelphia Eagles, told us in that process that they are looking to land whichever elite skill position player is still available. And since Kyle Pitts is off the board, that means that this pick, more than likely, if things play out like this, would be Ja'Marr Chase. Yes, there's a lot of talk about the Alabama connection with Tua, but Chase is by far and away the number one wide receiver in this draft class, and I think everybody realizes that. So no need to overthink it. Ja'Marr Chase to the Miami Dolphins here in order to surround Tua with as many weapons as possible. Then at pick number 7, we have got our first trade in this draft, and that will include the Detroit Lions going with the Denver Broncos for a trade where they're going to send them pick, obviously, 9, but also a 3rd rounder and a 5th rounder this year to move up 2 spots. And then that will lead to, you guessed it, a quarterback selection for the Denver Broncos, because they don't want to risk the fact that even though the Panthers did get Sam Darnold, that they could still get a quarterback here. So moving up 2 spots ensures the fact that they can get their guy at the quarterback position. And yes, Drew Lock is still there, but there's a reason why the Broncos were linked to Stafford, why they were linked to Deshaun Watson. And speaking of Watson, right now there's a quarterback on the board in Trey Lance who shares a lot of, if you will, similar characteristics. Rushing ability, big arm, high upside, and for that reason, we think he will be the selection here. Offensively, the Broncos have a lot of nice weapons, and maybe Trey Lance doesn't need to start immediately, but he definitely fits the bill in terms of quarterback and the type of prospect that the Broncos would be looking at. Next up, we have got the Carolina Panthers, who we alluded to did trade for Sam Darnold. So even though that technically means that the chance of them taking a quarterback here is a lot less likely, it's still on the table. But the quarterback left on the board is Mac Jones, so it'll come down to how they feel about Mac Jones versus, other quarterbacks that were on their draft board. And I think right now, maybe the separation between Darnold and Mac Jones not enough for them to go with a quarterback here. So instead, they go offensive lineman, as Sam Darnold isn't good enough to overcome a bad offensive line on his own. And the Panthers, it's a unit outside of Taylor Moton that doesn't have a lot of big-time players at that position. Tackle, guard, Rashawn Slater can play either of those positions, incredibly flexible when it comes to that. So this is a pick that makes a lot of sense for the Carolina Panthers. Then at pick 9, the Detroit Lions only moved down 2 spots and, got a 3rd round pick, 5th round pick as well, and still go with the guy that they would have, landed at pick number 7 to begin with, and that is wide receiver Devonta Smith. It's very close between him and Jalen Waddle. In fact, Waddle has been trending slowly but surely more and more up, closing the gap between himself and Smith. But either way, the Lions need a wide receiver 1 on that team. Whoever they draft will be the top guy day 1. And right now, I give the slight edge to Devonta Smith. Moving on to pick number 10, we have got the Dallas Cowboys here. And with the top 2 offensive linemen off the board, we are going with a cornerback, their next biggest need by far. And here, when it comes to cornerback, that means it's either going to be Patrick Surtain or J.C. Horn. Personally, we think J.C. Horn had a hell of a pro day where he just showed how freaky athletic he is. And when it comes to 2 guys that are so neck and neck to each other, that could be the thing that gives Horn the advantage. And that's how we have this thing playing out right now. Either way, though, both these guys are great picks one way or the other. Next up, we have got the New York Giants at pick number 11. And again, we think that this will likely be an area to trade down for the New York Giants with a team that could be looking for a quarterback. Enter the Chicago Bears, who, in order to make this trade happen, are sending a second rounder this year and a second rounder next year to move up 9 spots with the New York Giants in a trade that's going to take a lot of draft capital because there is still one of those top 5 quarterbacks available, and that is Mac Jones. Sure, the Bears got Andy Dalton in free agency, but let's not kid ourselves. He's not the long-term answer at this point in his career. He's better suited to be a backup in the NFL. And the Bears are so behind the 8 ball at the quarterback position that this pick has to almost be a quarterback. Yes, it will cost them, but again, it's almost a move that they are forced to do. So the Bears are going with Mac Jones here at pick number 11. Then at pick number 12, the Eagles, after having traded out of the top 10 here, that tells us they're going with Jalen Hurts at least for this year being their quarterback. And if that's the case, they need to give him weapons. Enter Jalen Waddle, arguably the number 1 wide receiver on that team day one because no more Deshaun Jackson, no more Alshon Jeffrey. Jalen Reagor really struggled last season. So they need to give Hurts some viable options at the wide receiver position. And Waddle, again, you can make a case for him being the number 2 wide receiver in this entire draft. Then at pick number 13, we have got the Chargers. Maybe if one of the top wide receivers was still on the board here, we could consider it. But instead, this pick becomes a lot easier because we are going offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw. We think the Chargers will continue to upgrade the offensive line. They already started that process in free agency, but that's just what happens when you have a franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert. That's what you need to do. I would love this pick for the Chargers if they were to go with Darrisaw. Then the Minnesota Vikings next at number 14, going a similar route. Look, they want to be a run-first team and then allow Kirk Cousins to be a game manager. The way that you do that is beef up the offensive line, which did take some hits during free agency. So enter the extremely versatile Elijah Vera Tucker, who can play both tackle and guard for the Vikings. Moving on at pick number 15, we have got the New England Patriots, who select linebacker Micah Parsons. And the logic here being that all the top quarterbacks are off the board for the New England Patriots. They invested in the offense in free agency. So that means, hey, you could look now to the defense and just going plain best player available. And Parsons, if it weren't for some off the field concerns, he'd be a slam dunk top 10 guy. And if there's anywhere he could go that could get him potentially out of any trouble, if it even exists, it would be New England. So I love the selection here for the New England Patriots and Parsons specifically. Next at number 16, we have got the Arizona Cardinals, and I've continued to have them go with a cornerback, and I'm not backing away from that, especially after the departure of Patrick Peterson. Here, I've got them going with, if not the top, then the second best corner in this draft class in Patrick Surtain. Either way, I think this pick will be Surtain or J.C. Horn, whichever one of the two is still available. In this case, it is Surtain, so he is the selection for the Cardinals. Moving on, we have got the Raiders here at pick number 17. And, prior to free agency, I was saying defense, defense, defense. After free agency, offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. It's a group that took a major hit. And for that reason, it needs to be addressed here at this point in time. And the guy I've got them going with, specifically Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State. If you want to give Carr any chance of success in duplicating what he did last year, then the offensive line has to be addressed. Next at number 18, the Miami Dolphins are on the clock with their second first round selection. And here, potentially I could have had them go offensive lineman, but with Tevin Jenkins off the board, you could argue that maybe there's another drop off at that position. So they could maybe even trade back. But I think a simple solution is also just continue to make the defense better and go with the best available defensive player. And Christian Barmore from Alabama, the defensive tackle, is someone that's starting to make some noise and trend upwards. He's by far and away the best defensive tackle in this entire draft class, and I think he'd be a great fit on that defensive line for the Miami Dolphins. Now, moving on to pick number 19, we have got the Washington football team. And at least for a minute, they are on the clock because right afterwards, we have got them trading out of this pick with, guess who, the Baltimore Ravens, who, in order to make this pick happen, are going to be sending a second rounder this year to Washington. And the idea being the Ravens don't want to miss out on the next best available wide receiver. That is Rashad Bateman from Minnesota. In my opinion, the separation between him and Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, not all that much. Sammy Watkins is not the answer at the wide receiver position for the Ravens. Lamar Jackson desperately needs other weapons other than Andrews. And then Marquise Brown, you could argue that if he struggles again this year, that he could be on the way out for the Ravens. So Bateman, a big physical wide receiver, would be a great fit in Baltimore. Then we have got the New York Giants at pick 20, who traded down previously with the Chicago Bears. And again, they're in a great situation here because they addressed a lot of needs in free agency. Wide receiver, tight end. They could maybe go offensive lineman here, but instead they decide to continue to upgrade that defense. You know, a pairing that's been pretty popular for the Giants is going edge rusher with their initial pick, and they can still do that here. And along the way, having gained draft capital, I would love this move for the New York Giants. Here, I've got them going with defensive end Kwity Paye, who, if not, you know, him, maybe Jalen Phillips, one of the top edge rushers in this draft class. Either way, though, very good value for the New York Giants. Then moving on to pick number 21, we've got the Indianapolis Colts here. I believe the top positions of need probably are going to be tackle or cornerback because, look, you need to replace Costanza, who obviously retired this offseason. But again, is there an offensive lineman worth that selection at this point in time? You can make the case, no, not quite. So instead, upgrade the cornerback, the secondary, with Greg Newsome, who has been trending upwards. You can make the case for Caleb Farley, and I do think it will be close because after his injury, he has been trending downwards. But the question is, how far down will he drop? You know, I think it'll be right around this point in time where teams will start to look at him as a very serious possibility. But maybe the Colts just decide to play it a little bit safer and go Newsome instead. At pick number 22, though, the Tennessee Titans are on the clock, and they waste little time with the selection in going with the aforementioned Caleb Farley at cornerback. Yes, they could go wide receiver here, considering that Corey Davis and Humphreys left. But they also did lose Adoree Jackson in free agency, and you could argue that Caleb Farley at this point in time, because he's been getting some positive news on his injury, is a great value because only a couple of weeks ago, he was the number one cornerback draft prospect in this class. So at this point in time, seems like the Titans get a very good value piece. Moving on, we have got the New York Jets, who, again, with their second first-round selection, this is where the draft really begins for them because we know what they're going to do with that first pick. That's quarterback. But here at pick number 23, they're still a team that has a lot of needs. And when you're in a situation like that, usually the thing to do is go best player available. And hey, you can never have enough edge rushers. I think Jalen Phillips, again, if it's not him or Kwity Paye, it's one of those two guys that's going to be the first edge rusher off the board. Could very well be Jalen Phillips. So at this point in time, a good value pick for the New York Jets as they just continue with the idea of getting the most amount of talent and both combining quality and quantity here. Next at pick number 24, we have got the Pittsburgh Steelers. And for me, this pick almost has to be an offensive lineman. You know, the question is, who is your next best offensive lineman? Me personally, a guy that I really like is someone like a Jalen Mayfield who, look, forget about the rankings here on PFF. When it comes to this next batch of offensive linemen, it's going to come down to how each respective team evaluates them. You could go from scout to scout, from analyst to analyst, and one would have, maybe someone like Leatherwood here, or someone like Eichenberg here, or someone like Mayfield. Us specifically, we have got Mayfield at this point in time. There hasn't been any specific word from Pittsburgh about them tipping their hand as to which offensive lineman they like, but after losing Pouncey, after losing Villanueva, you would think that this pick would be offensive lineman. Moving on, we have got the Jacksonville Jaguars. And again, for them, their second first-round selection, this is where the draft really begins, because after having selected Trevor Lawrence, now in a similar situation with the New York Jets, they're still a team with a lot of needs, specifically defensively, and specifically in the secondary. So right now, with maybe, the top cornerbacks off the board, you could still address the secondary and do so by selecting safety Trevon Moehrig from TCU. The number one safety prospect in this draft class. If he were to go, it would be somewhere right around this point in the first round, towards the latter portion of it. And we think that him with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who desperately need to upgrade the secondary, is a great fit. Moving on, we have got the Cleveland Browns, who just recently signed another stud free agent, specifically Jadeveon Clowney. So all of a sudden, you could argue, well, they found their edge rusher opposite Myles Garrett. So here, what do you do instead? Well, you continue to address other positions on the defense. Linebacker is an area of need potentially, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is that next best available linebacker. I personally don't think that the separation between him and Micah Parsons is all that much, so I would love the selection here for the Cleveland Browns, going JOK. Next up, we have got the Washington football team, who had traded back with the Baltimore Ravens. They are now back on the clock, and since quarterback, kind of out of the picture, instead here, they go with an offensive lineman. And specifically, with the idea being that, okay, maybe they don't have their quarterback of the future on their roster right now, but build up the offensive line so that when the quarterback of the future arrives, at least that area is already taken care of. And for me, my next best available offensive lineman is Alex Leatherwood, so he goes to the Washington football team. Moving on, we have got here the New Orleans Saints. And again, they could go a number of different ways at pick number 28, because they did lose a lot of players in free agency due to just cap casualties in the situation they were with the salary cap. They could go linebacker, they could go cornerback, wide receiver, defensive line, but I still think they need to find a guy opposite Lattimore in the secondary. And I've got Asante Samuel as that next best available cornerback at this point in time. So he finds his way to New Orleans. Moving on, we have got the Green Bay Packers at pick number 29. And again, this is another team that could go a lot of different ways. They could go wide receiver, they could go linebacker, cornerback, offensive line, defensive line, just best player available. And they have been linked, the Green Bay Packers, to someone like a Rashad Bateman a bunch, but with the trade that the Baltimore Ravens pulled off, Bateman obviously no longer on the board, and we don't see the likelihood of them taking, one of those smaller wide receivers like an Elijah Moore, for example. So instead, just choosing to upgrade the offensive line, which did take a hit during free agency, and they decide to upgrade it by going with offensive lineman Liam Eichenberg from Notre Dame. Moving on, we've got the Bills here at pick number 30, and offensively, the Bills are pretty much set. So going defense here and best player available, they could upgrade the defensive line, specifically the edge. So for that reason, we go next best available edge rusher. That is Jason Oweh from Penn State, who had a great pro day, and because of that has become a first round type of selection. Afterwards, we have got the Kansas City Chiefs here at pick number 31. And again, a team that could go edge rusher, they could go offensive lineman, They could go wide receiver because that was a position that they ultimately kind of whiffed on during free agency. They did lose Sammy Watkins as well. And, Mecole Hardman hasn't exactly panned out. A guy that is going up draft boards slowly but surely is Kadarius Toney, wide receiver from Florida. And I do think that could be a pairing here for the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, it's either going to be wide receiver or offensive lineman. Again, I think maybe they might value Toney a little bit more so than just the next best available offensive lineman. That's why he is the pick here. And then finally, we have got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And boy, the rich keep getting richer because the Bucs had one of the best free agencies, and all they did was simply just kind of bring back all their players. So they could really go any which way with this selection. But me, specifically, I've got them going edge rusher. You can never have enough edge rushers. And I'm going with Azeez Ojulari here, my next best available defensive end. And he's a guy that could, replace JPP whenever, he retires, as he is getting older, up there in age. And for that reason, I think he's a really nice fit in Tampa Bay. Also does have some positional flexibility, whether it be linebacker or edge rusher. So with that, we wrap up this latest 2021 NFL mock draft. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? Who do you want your favorite team to select? Let us know in the comments section. And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin. And check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. All the details in the description. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.